Hey, Josh.
Hey, what's up?
What's going on with all the cases there?
I started listening to CDs again.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
So what you got going on there?
Well, I got a CD player. I started throwing them back on. And, I got some Neil Young here. Got some Neil Diamond. Got a little Nickelback.
You know what? I know a dude that works with Nickelback.
Oh, yeah? Is it Chad Kroger?
Do you think if I was talking about the lead singer of the band, I'd be saying I know a guy that works with Nickelback?
Maybe you don't know he's the lead singer.
This is Richard Beland's second story.
Hey, I found my Bloodhound Gang CD.
Welcome to Second Story, everyone. My name's Corey Leckie. With me, as always, is Josh Cybulski. Josh, what's going on?
Not much, buddy. How are you?
I'm doing great. Very excited today. Our guest today is an award-winning photographer and college professor, and is most notable for photographing rock stars in their element on stage. In his career, he's captured iconic photos of Slash, Iggy Pop, Beastie Boys, INXS, Nirvana, AC/DC, and many more. But most close to my heart, he's got to work directly with Gord Downie and the Tragically Hip. Our guest today is Richard Beland. Richard, what's happening?
Hi, guys. Oh, just working away and kind of getting ready to go away and getting ready for the summer as well.
Yeah, nice.
And I'm here with you guys.
Perfect. So our show is Second Story, and we talk to people about pivotal moments in their life, sort of where you went from one direction, changed, and went down a different direction. I know we have many of those in our lives, but we'd like to hear your second story. So, Richard, you got the floor.
Honestly, I like to think that I only have one story. It's been this, trajectory to where I am now. But if I really had to squeeze it, what would be a second story is, I guess, I went to high school here in Sarnia, and I studied, I had 6 credits in welding. And if anybody knows anything about Sarnia, we live adjacent to what they affectionately call Chemical Valley. I guess there's some affection there because it is the main source of financial drive in this area. And so I think to some degree, it's almost expected that you're going to work in Chemical Valley or something to do with it. So, my dad was a welder and a pipe fitter, and I really enjoyed welding. Obviously there's technique to it, but there's also creativity to it. So I studied welding when I was in high school, and that's what I was going to do. But the one thing is, I noticed my dad, he always came home tired, dirty. He was a hard worker, and I think probably that's where I got part of my work ethic. So there was a point where we sat down at dinner with my parents, and we decided just to kind of expand my employment opportunities. Why don't I carry on and study something else that would still lead me to Chemical Valley, but maybe just give me more options? And so I ended up deciding to enroll in mechanical engineering. And I studied mechanical engineering for 3 years at Fanshawe College in London. And in my third year, if you want to call it the pivotal moment, that wasn't brought upon me by my own choice. My dad died. And so that altered my direction and attitude and look on life, I guess. Anyway, I finished mechanical engineering, graduated, moved to Toronto. And, I went for a couple high-level interviews. I did fairly well in it. But when I went to the interviews, I really started to see this wasn't the path for me. So kind of in an underwhelming move, I went and got a job at a sandblasting company out in Etobicoke, West Toronto. I moved into this sketchy motel. It's kind of funny because they're all very expensive condos there now, but it used to be a string of motels. And one night, it was the dead of winter, and if you know anything about sandblasting, the sand gets everywhere. And this is obviously long before cell phones. I trudged across the parking lot one night, and I went to the payphone there, and it was this gross payphone, but I still remember the smell of it. It smelled like urine and stale smoke. And I called, a very close friend of mine. And if I wasn't in tears, I was very close to tears because it just was not what I had saw as my destiny. And he said to me in that conversation that night, he's like, why don't you go back to school and study your real passion or your true passion, which has always been photography. I went back to school and studied photography, and in the end, it ended up being the right move. So that's kind of why I say there really isn't a second story, because that was the trajectory. It kind of went in a straight line in a sense. But if I had to squeeze a second story, that would be it.
So you went to school for photography, but you said it was a passion of yours. So what type of things were you doing prior to that?
Well, geez, if you want to go back to me being a child, or maybe early teens, or before I was even a 13-year-old teenager, I grew up in Brights Grove, and the earliest thing I can remember feeling compelled to photograph was there was a flood in Perch Creek that was right by my house. And it was coming over the road. It was maybe springtime. The ice had blocked the creek. The roads were flooded right where there's the Tim Hortons and everything now. And so I asked my mom if I could use her Instamatic camera because I wanted to go photograph it. I really felt compelled to go record it. And then if you want to tie that into maybe where rock and roll came involved, again, growing up in Brights Grove, I used to go over to DeSena's Variety Store, which is sadly it's gone now. And I would take the money that I'd earned from collecting golf balls, and I would buy Rolling Stone magazine, Hit Parader magazine, and always looking through the stories and everything. I'd read the stories, but the one thing that always caught my eye was who gets to photograph rock bands? Like, how cool is that? I'm reading these stories about Rush and Led Zeppelin and the Who and the Stones, and I'd look at the photos and I'm like, who gets to do this? What a great job that is. And I started going to concerts in 1983, but in 1986, I went to go see the Grateful Dead, Bob Dylan, and Tom Petty in Buffalo. And someone had given me a Nikon camera not too long before that. And I knew at that stage, because that was my second Grateful Dead show, that they allowed recording. They would let people bring their audio recorders in there. It was kind of a thing to tape the Grateful Dead. And I thought, you know what, why don't I just bring my camera, just see? And this is long before they have airport security or whatever. So it's not like I snuck my camera in, but I discreetly walked in with my camera. I had a floor ticket for the show, so I, kind of squeezed my way as close as I could. And I photographed all three bands, Tom Petty, Bob Dylan, and the Grateful Dead. And then I went home, brought the film, over to the Super Center or whatever it was you could get your film developed. And I remember going into my bedroom and looking at the photos, which were actually pretty good, considering I had no idea how to barely work a camera. And, but what I thought to myself, or what really was striking, was, wow, I'm looking at my own photographs of a show that I was at, and I'm not looking at someone else's photographs. And that was kind of the beginning of it. And so that was July 4th, 1986. And then in October of that year, I had tickets to see Neil Young at Cobo Hall in Detroit. Same thing. I think it was October 10th, 1986. So I brought my camera. I believe I had a 4th or a 6th row ticket, and I brought my camera and I photographed Neil and got some great shots. And then April 30th, 1987, I'll never forget this date because that was a huge moment for me. U2 played on the Joshua Tree tour at Pontiac Silverdome, and same deal, brought my camera. And this time I was front row. I was right up against the rails, and I photographed the concert. And all three of these concerts, I ended up getting some decent photographs. And, it might have been proximity. Because I was close to the band in all three stages, or all three times. But I ended up getting photographs where I was looking at them going, wow, I get to look at my own photos. I'm not looking in a magazine right now. And
that's cool.
Geez, I lost the question now, but that's where it all kind of like photography started going. This is something I really love doing. And I'm combining music, which I'm pretty much obsessed with. And I'm combining photography, which I always have been interested in. And I guess you could say it was a passion. And I combined the two of them. And that's maybe where it all began. Those 4 moments are what I really remember.
This episode is brought to you by Bad Workwear North America. Bad is a fashion-forward workwear brand from Australia with a wide selection of workwear for men and women that is not only durable and functional, but stylish and modern as well. With items like slim-fit work pants, waterproof hoodies, and a robust women's lineup, you're sure to find something you'll love. They offer free returns and exchanges on all orders, and listeners of this show, you can use the code SECONDSTORY at checkout to get 10% off your first order at badnorthamerica.com. Once again, use the code SECONDSTORY at badnorthamerica.com and treat yourself to some new gear.
Something I take away from your story, just because it's a part of my life too, or it was sort of my path as well. And Corey, I think you'd probably agree with this too. It's part of yours. You went down sort of the safe path into mechanical engineering, which was not something you were necessarily passionate about, and then eventually circled back to your passion, ultimately, which was photography. And that's something that Corey's and my generations also did. Like, I did that. I took the safe path, ended up working in a car factory, making really good money, but just despising what I was doing. And then my father passed away when I was doing that. And I was like, this can't be my life. So I had a very similar sort of second story as you, but a lot of people in our generations, that's sort of the path they took. Like, they knew they had a passion and probably what they were destined to do, but they didn't go directly at it. And I think we still do that to kids to this day a lot, but I know that, like, I encourage my kids to go after their passion, but they're very young. They're not in school yet. Do you think we've sort of moved towards, like, you can make your passion your career, or are we still in sort of that old school thought process of, no, you should take the safe path and you should do something that's going to, give you a career where you make money?
I'm on the fence because, you obviously want your kids to make a living and you want them to be able to support themselves. And nowadays everything's more expensive. But at the same time, I'm really happy in life. And would I be as happy as I am now? I mean, I wake up and I'm just like, all right, let's get on with it. I'm excited every day. Every day is different. I get to travel a lot. I get to do what I love. And I don't know if we're in this stage where it's either. I think it's partly up to parenting, but it's also up to the individual who's about to embark on whatever path. Because if you want to run your own business, and you guys know this, and you want to set out on your own art type career, you got to be really motivated. I'm sorry, but nothing I've accomplished in life is because of luck. Everything that I've got and accomplished is come out of hard work and putting myself in good positions. I don't think there's much luck to what I've done. There's occasional serendipity maybe, but so if you are raising a child that is motivated and ambitious, respectfully ambitious, this is a great path to go down. But it doesn't come just by your phone randomly ringing. My phone isn't going to ring while we're sitting here. You got to go out and work hard to get it. And I'm 56 and I'm 30 years into this right now. I graduated in 94 from photography. So it's 30 years to the day. I still have to work hard every day, 30 years in. And but it doesn't bother me. I wake up at 6 and I work until whatever, 10, 11 at night, depending on what I have going on that night. So if you're highly motivated, this is the way you should go, I think. But if you're not and you need guidance and you need support, then working in Chemical Valley is a great way to make a living too. I'm sure everyone's happy that's doing that, or hopefully they are.
Not to say that this is like you said, it's not easy work. It's not easy to own a business. And to be honest with you, the talent portion of it is actually a small portion of running a business. Like networking, there's invoicing, scheduling, bookkeeping, being social, picking up the phone, making phone calls. Like that's all part of running a business. But I just remember thinking to myself, I don't want that. I just don't want to be miserable day to day.
I didn't want to be dirty.
Yeah.
My dad would come home and he'd have these things where he would get a spark in his eye from welding, and it just looked painful and dangerous. And I don't know. I wanted to be near the rock and roll.
Yeah, I can't blame you for that. My dad was actually a mechanical engineer as well.
Oh, right
He
on.
did. He eventually worked his way into like aerospace and stuff like that too. But I remember like he would come home every single night, and we'd have dinner and do the whole thing. He'd hang out with our family for a bit. But my dad was probably the best carpenter I've ever seen. Like that was truly his passion.
Hmm.
And by the time I was a teenager, I remember thinking like, why is he not a carpenter? Because that's all he wants to do at night and on the weekends was just build stuff out of wood. That was what he loved.
Right.
And eventually he got to a point when he was about 45 and he was like, I am going to retire at 55. Like, this is what I'm going to do. Cause all I want to do is carpentry. I'm going to retire at 55, with enough money that I can just do carpentry the rest of my life. And I was like, yeah, but why can't you do carpentry now for a living? Like, why not? Why not just do it? And my dad was just such a safe, like always a safe person. And that was his goal. 55, I'm going to retire. I'm going to become a carpenter. I'm going to hit my goal. And my dad died at 52. So he never got there to be the carpenter. And that was like a very big moment in my life that was powerful. I was like, oh, like we're not here for very long. If I got dreams, I better like plan to hit them sooner rather than later because I may never get that moment. So I'm sure for you that you could have had a similar experience. I know Corey did as well. But yeah, it is a grind to get to where you want to go. Like you don't just climb the hill. You got to climb the hill and you got to stay there. Like once you reach to the top of, the pinnacle of where you want to go. What would you say, like in climbing the hill and eventually getting to where you wanted to go? What was the hardest part for you, like in your business?
The hardest part for me, I think, was that I'm painfully shy. I'm an introvert, and it took me 5, 6, 7 years after I graduated just to get the confidence that I could talk to people and just be myself. So I think my career dragged a little bit in the beginning just because of I couldn't get outside of myself. I didn't. Someone told me at some point, just be you, and they're either going to like you or they're not. But at least you're you. You're your own authentic self, and it took me a long time to get over that. I still deal with anxiety and fear of talking to people, which is weird given the business that I'm in and the fact that I teach. But when I think about teaching, you're just giving information and telling stories and combining the two. So it's not like I'm having a conversation in a sense. I'm much better now, but that was my hardest part, was getting over this shyness.
Yeah. It's funny that you're a teacher. Like I'm introverted too. And I've dealt with anxiety in social situations. Corey, I'd say you're an introvert as well. And yet we're all teachers. All three of us.
Yeah, there you go.
That's kind of funny that's where we sort of ended up. For you, like I read that you went to Europe. You did a trip through Europe in a van.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. How much did that help with like, because you're obviously going to places you're unfamiliar with. How much did that help when it comes to like social anxiety and things like that? Did that play a part at all?
Well, it probably was worse. So I've been going to Europe for a long time, and I built part of my career by working in Europe, primarily in England. So I went into photography that fall. I was telling you the story in the phone booth, was in the wintertime, probably in January. That fall, I went back into photography. There was a teacher strike about 4 or 5 weeks into the September term. And I remember the strike, I think this was 1989. And, the strike was going on. And I just thought, man, this is not what I wanted. So when the teacher strike hit about 5 weeks, I remember going in my dean's office and just saying, I'm sorry, but I'm going to withdraw from the program because I don't want to sit here and wait for teachers on strike. And I respect the fact why they're on strike, but this is no good to me as a student. So I took my money, my books, my cameras, and I decided that I was going to go on an adventure to Europe. So that spring, so I guess that would be the spring of 1990, I bought an open-ended plane ticket and I flew from Toronto on the least expensive airline I could find because I wanted to be good with my money. I flew into the least expensive city I could find, which was Frankfurt, Germany. And I don't speak any German. ein Bier, bitte. I know how to order a beer. So I landed in Frankfurt. Mind you, I have a friend who's German who lived at the time in Peine, which is not too far from Frankfurt. But anyway, I ended up in a youth hostel there. I went to an auto auction. Remember, I can't speak German. And I bought a van at an auto auction. It was 7,700 Deutschmarks, which at the time, I don't know, maybe was 5,000 Canadian or something. My plan was to keep that van forever and kind of keep it as like a cottage in a sense. I would just park it in Frankfurt and leave it there. Anyway, I jumped in the van once I bought it, and I never stayed in a hotel afterwards. I lived in that van. It was my home for 6 months. And I just drove wherever I wanted to go. I had no agenda. I had nothing cut out for me. My kind of bases were Amsterdam, Paris, and London. And whenever I needed to kind of just, recharge, I would go back to one of those cities because they were the cities that I got to know. And I'd been to Europe before, so I knew those cities a little bit. And I did what jazz musicians call woodshedding. I lived in the van and I had my textbook. I read that textbook cover to cover. It's still the textbook today that I recommend to my students. I brought all my film. I probably had 80 rolls of film or whatever. And I just drove around. And for example, I spent 5 weeks in Scotland. I drove the entire perimeter of Scotland and I went to every castle on the side of the ocean. So sorry, I'm on a tangent here, but to answer your question, did that help or work against my introversion? It probably made me more introverted because I lived in the van. I never stayed in any motels, hotels. I slept in this van and I would go to campgrounds to shower. I would go to airports to shower. I would jump in the river and shower. I can remember swimming in the river in Austria and swimming in freezing cold rivers in Scotland just to clean. And I lived in this van and I taught myself photography. And to jump far ahead, the Grateful Dead were touring in Europe. So I went to every city they were going to play. This is long before the internet. And I bought tickets to go to every show. So the Dead tour was going to start in maybe October or something of 1990. Before the tour started, I wanted to squeeze Greece in. So I was driving to Greece and I was going through Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslavia before the civil war there. And it was raining, the sun broke, beautiful rainbow. I was bombing down this road with no guardrails. And it was through the mountains in Yugoslavia. You could see the ocean. And I went into a corner a little too fast and I hydroplaned and I rolled the van. And good Lord, I thought I was going to die. I honestly thought that was the end. And when the van finally settled, I was with my girlfriend at the time. She had a broken collarbone. I had scratches and cuts, but aside from that, I wasn't damaged. The van finally rested on its side. And that was the end of that trip. There's always more to the story, but to cut to the end of the story, she was American. So we went to the Canadian embassy first in Belgrade and they weren't much help, unfortunately. So we ended up going to the American embassy and they were great. They helped us out and we got Heather a flight home. I flew back to Frankfurt because I thought maybe I would carry on from the Grateful Dead tour. And I remember going one morning, I woke up and just thought, oh man, this is not a good situation I'm in. And I was singing the Clash's Should I Stay or Should I Go as I walked to the Pakistan International Airlines. That's the flight that I had. And I thought, whatever I land on when I hit the door is what I'm doing. And it was Should I Go? And so I cashed my plane ticket in and I still have all the unripped Grateful Dead tickets. I never got to see the European tour, but I came back home, went back to photography. And after living in a van for 6 months, I was ready and I went back and I went into photography and I did my 4 years and I rocked in school. I got probably straight A's. I was so ready to be back in reality. So anyway, sorry, long story. I got a lot
No,
of long stories.
That's great.
No.
How close were you to the edge on that flip? Because you said
Oh
there was no
man,
guardrails and
there was no freaking guardrails. I mean, it's Yugoslavia. The doctor was smoking. Let me put it that way. There were cigarette butts on the ground. Heather's broken collarbone. He literally put his knee in her back and pulled her shoulders back like that. And she screamed, and the nurse put her hand on her mouth and said, "No screaming," in really broken English. There's no guardrails. How close did it come to going down the mountain? Probably pretty darn close. I think I might have remembered swearing while the van was spinning and thinking that's it. In that you see everything flash before you. But you know what? Recently I photographed, oh my God, I forget his name right now. A psychic medium.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm not going to go on a huge tangent on this, but anyway,
No, that's
he
fine.
was talking to people in the crowd that had had loved ones die. And at one point he said to somebody, "I'm channeling your father right now, and he's telling me that he saved your life in a car accident." And I don't know.
Yeah.
I thought I was going to die in that split second, and I'm here 36 years later to tell you the story or whatever, right? So
yeah,
I didn't go down the mountain. Maybe it was luck. Maybe there is a bit of luck in my life. Maybe someone saved me. Maybe there's some intervention. I don't know.
When you were on that tour, you did get to photograph the Grateful Dead while you were there?
Not on that one. No, I traveled and saw the Dead about 150 times. I was another obsession of mine. I was absolutely obsessed with the Grateful Dead. I saw them everywhere you can think of in North America. I toured off and on from 86 right until the end in 95. I saw a bunch of shows the year Jerry Garcia died.
You mentioned castles that you photographed every castle in Scotland.
No, not every castle, but all the ones that were on the coast I stopped at. I drove the entire perimeter of Scotland.
How much do you think the experience of going through Europe and having the opportunity to photograph some of the like most iconic buildings in the world, how much did that play into you coming back to school and being able to be very successful and ultimately in your career being very successful? Was that sort of like the beginning for you, sort of your early education?
It had huge impact on my education because that's where it started. And I call it woodshedding. If you're not familiar with the term, it comes from jazz musicians. They would literally lock themselves in the woodshed and learn their instrument, right? Mind you, my formal education afterwards is really what helped me develop as a photographer that would have versatility, I guess. But that was the foundation, what I learned in those 6 months living in the van and just figuring it out on my own and shooting all these rolls of film. And I still have every roll of film, every negative, I should say. I kept all that stuff. I have all those photographs. So It had a big impact on me, and it had an impact in my life now. And that's why I say that there's not really a second story. It's everything I'm on has just been one trajectory forward. It's not always a steep incline. Sometimes it's more level, but I've just been moving forward the whole time.
Yeah. You talked about when you were young, you had like this deep love of music. How much do you think living as close as you did to Detroit played into it and like the whole Detroit music scene?
Huge. Because all we would listen to was Detroit radio. Toronto radio wasn't even something I knew about. So back then it was WRIF, and then eventually WLLZ came along. And AC/DC toured on the Back in Black tour. I guess that would be 81. So in 81, I would have been 12 or something like that, maybe 11. And my friend Greg had an older sister, and her boyfriend's named Todd. I specifically remember he went to AC/DC. I was too young. My parents wouldn't have let me go. I didn't even ask. But he went to see the Back in Black tour in London, Ontario. And he came back and we're in the kitchen. He was front row at the concert. He was telling us the story about being up front and getting pushed around, but being able to be right there in front of Angus Young. And, I even at 11, 12, I was a huge rock head already. And I just was listening with both ears going, oh my God, that sounds so amazing. I cannot wait until I'm allowed to go to a concert. In 82, The Who and the Stones both toured. And I think Ozzy toured as well. Blizzard of Oz and Black Sabbath was touring Heaven and Hell. A lot of my friends were allowed to go to those 4 concerts. My parents wouldn't let me go to any of them. And I was crushed. I asked to go to all of them and I was crushed. I wasn't allowed to go to any of them. So it was very early that I was getting into it. And those 4 I just named, 2 or 3 of them were in Detroit. So, in defense of my parents, not wanting me to go to Detroit at 12 years old with a bunch of my buddies probably was a good choice as a parent. I was finally allowed to go to a concert in 83, which was Aerosmith at Pine Knob, so outside of Detroit. But Detroit played a huge role. And once I went to that Aerosmith show, that was it. It was all over. I was obsessed with going. In the beginning, it was going to Detroit. And to make money in those early days, I would collect golf balls at Krabby's and Huron Oaks, golf courses that are adjacent to Brights Grove. I would go in at night, get all the golf balls. I would come back home with my pals. We would clean them. We'd put them in egg crates and we'd go sell them to the golfers, back to the golfers. Every single dollar I made selling golf balls went into buying concert tickets. And by the end of 85, I'd probably seen 20 concerts. I went to see Rush and I went to see Robert Plant and I went to see Deep Purple and Yes and all these concerts. And you combine that with getting those magazines I was telling you about, it consumed my life in such a positive way. It really was an obsession. To this day, I still have that obsession of music and going to concerts. So Detroit played a huge role in it. And then 86 is when I decided someone had given me a camera and I brought it to the concert. And that kind of circles back to that story I already told.
Yeah.
How did so you went from photographing these concerts, you said around 86. How did that translate into eventually becoming a career, making money at it?
Okay. First of all, can I just go back to Detroit just for a second? Back then, Detroit was dangerous, but it was thrilling. And I remember when Deep Purple announced they hadn't played for years with the classic lineup, Ritchie Blackmore. And we went and stood in line to get concert tickets long before the internet overnight in Detroit. And there was just the craziest stuff happening that night. And it was terrifying, but it was exhilaratingly thrilling. And that was part of it too. I just love being on edge. So Detroit put you on edge. I went to see Alice Cooper on Devil's Night and Halloween back in the mid 80s as well. So Detroit played a big role. So sorry, I had to jump back there. How did I jump from just doing it, I guess, for fun or for my own enjoyment to making money? Okay, that's a good question. I was in photography at Fanshawe. And I should add, because Lambton College never had a photography program back then. So I went to Fanshawe. So I was working for the Fanshawe newspaper. They have a newspaper. I think they still have it. It's called the Interrobang. And I went down there and I said, can I photograph whatever band's playing at the pub or whatever? I don't want to do any lifestyle or sports. I just want to photograph your music. So they helped open the door for me. And, back then Junk House was playing and the Tea Party. Early 90s bands were playing Fanshawe pubs. So they were just kind of getting started. So I was getting my opportunities. And I remember going to the newspaper one day and saying, is there any reason why we can't photograph bands in Toronto? And the guy that ran the newspaper at the time said, well, I don't have the time to do it, but if you want to make the phone calls, before the internet, if you can line it up, I'm supportive. And so I said, okay, I've been a keener. I got on the phone and started making phone calls. And this probably would have been 91, 92. And I managed to get into a few shows. I think I shot ZZ Top back then and Rush and the Chili Peppers, whatever was happening back then. Tool, Rage Against the Machine. These guys were on their very first tours playing the concert hall. So I got into all of those. And it was just because I was being a keener. So I started building a bit of a portfolio. And this was also when you had normal dark rooms, like traditional dark rooms. One day I was in the dark room and I was printing a photograph of Ron Wood from the Rolling Stones. And one of my classmates who was in the year ahead of me, her name's Paula Tizard. And she's like, "Oh, wow, you're into photographing musicians or whatever." I said, yeah, probably rambled to her like I am to you guys. And she says, my brother, Ken Tizard, if that's not ringing a bell, it will in a second. He's a music editor, a photography editor at I think it was Canadian Musician in Toronto. You should go speak to him. So Ken Tizard is now the bass player for the Watchmen. But at the time, he was a killer bass player playing in his own band. He wasn't with the Watchmen yet, but he was a music editor. So I went down to Toronto and I brought my portfolio of whatever I had at that time. And he's like, "Oh yeah, this is cool. I can see you're into it," or whatever. And then, not to drag another story out, but on November 3rd, which is my birthday, 1993, Ken called me on your normal telephone and said, "Hey, Richard, tomorrow night, Nirvana's playing at Maple Leaf Gardens. We need a photographer. Are you interested in covering the show?" And it's kind of funny because when you think about, do you want to go photograph Nirvana? Anybody's going to say yes to that, right? So what a birthday gift. November 3rd, 1993, I got that phone call. November 4th, 1993, I went to Maple Leaf Gardens and photographed Nirvana and the In Utero tour. And, it wasn't the only pivotal big moment, but it was a big moment. And of course, as you know, Kurt died in 94. So in April of 94, I think it was. So I was able to photograph Kurt Cobain 6 months before he died. The other thing that Ken did for me, which is big and huge, was I told him I was going to England that summer because now I'd opened the doors to going to Europe by living in that van. And Ken said, "We work with this photo agency. Maybe you want to go try and set up an interview when you're there in London, right?" And so he gave me the name of the place. It was called Syndicated International Network. And I made an appointment. I brought this mini portfolio that I'd built based on all these bands that I'd photographed at this point. And I went for the interview. Turns out the photo editor at Syndicated International Network, was Canadian. Her name's Leanne Henscher, still a photographer to this day. Great person, great woman. We got into talking just because we're both Canadian. She could tell I was keen. I had planned on staying in Europe at that particular time. So this would be the summer of, I don't know, maybe I'm skipping years here. I think it was the summer of 93. Anyway, she said, "I can set you up with some shows if you want to go photograph whatever," right? So during the daytime, I would deliver packages for Sin. This is before normal bike couriers and stuff like that. So I got to know London really well because I would go around on the subway in the daytime and just deliver packages for them. In the nighttime, I would photograph whatever was playing in London. I would shoot in dingy clubs to Wembley Arena. In the weekends, I would go to Europe, and it's not as luxurious as it would sound. I would sleep in my car and I would go photograph festivals or whatever was going on. And some of the stuff in 1993 was U2 was on the Zoo TV tour, which was called the Zooropa tour, I think, at that time. So I went to Stuttgart, photographed U2. One of the big things I photographed that summer was this festival that still exists today in Belgium. And it was called the Torhout Vector Festival. It's called Rock Vector. Probably 80,000 people. That particular festival was headlined by Metallica. It also had on the bill the Black Crowes, Neil Young, Lenny Kravitz, Sonic Youth, a bunch of other bands I can't remember right now. But the second from the bottom was the Tragically Hip. So that opened up the doors. I have goosebumps right now to the Tragically Hip because it was incredible. Oh my God, I'm forgetting Faith No More. That's the band I was working for. The agency had a connection with Faith No More. So they got me in through Faith No More. I had a killer gold all access laminate for those 2 nights, one night in Torhout, one night in Vector in Belgium. And so I had all access. I could go backstage. I was sitting at the table with Kurt Hammett from Metallica, eating dinner. It was truly a remarkable experience. Anyway, I could go on and on about it. The most important thing is the Tragically Hip. I photographed the hip both nights. I came home with a ton of photographs because I had to go back to school. And I had spent, I don't know, 6-7 weeks in England, living in my car, living in this dingy hotel in Earl's Court in London. Everything was budget back then. But I came home with this amazing portfolio full of, I probably shot 40 bands that summer, 30 bands, like big bands, because I was willing to do what no one else wanted to do, right? I would sleep in a tent at a rest area. I would sleep in the backseat of my car or whatever. But I built this huge portfolio that summer.
I'm a huge Tragically Hip fan. Actually, there's a picture of Gord Downey right there. Maybe you took it.
Oh, that is not mine.
No. Okay. So you said that was sort of, you formed a relationship with the Hip at that point. Did you get to meet them, and did that set off? Because I know you've taken album photos with them. I know you've been to many of their concerts and done many things with the Hip. So was that a starting point for that?
Yeah. Okay. So it just occurred to me that tour was the Fully Completely tour, which, as you know, now is a huge deal, right? It started everything. So that was in 1993. If we want to skip ahead, I guess, over the years, I'd photographed the Hip a number of times between 93 and 98. But I didn't really have a relationship with them. I met Gord Sinclair that night, one of those nights backstage in Belgium. But the more important thing happened in 1998. I think it was 98. The Hip had just recorded Phantom Power. So, we're skipping ahead a few albums here. We're past Day
That's
for
actually,
Night.
that's my favorite Hip album, actually. Yeah.
Which one? Phantom Power?
Phantom Power. Yeah.
Okay, well then this is a good point to jump in there. So I was working for Chart Magazine. Remember, I graduated in 94. I moved to Toronto, which we can talk about as well if you ever wanted to. But I moved to Toronto. So from 94 to 98, I worked really hard in Toronto. Two of the magazines I worked for were Impact Magazine, three, Impact, Access, and Chart. Chart Magazine, which was a national magazine, was about to do a story on the Tragically Hip because they were getting ready to go out on the Phantom Power tour. By Divine Right was opening. So they asked me to go and do a photo shoot with Gord Downey and Jose Contreras, the lead singer from By Divine Right. So I'm like, okay, that's cool. We ended up choosing the Horseshoe as a location in the daytime because, the Hip had some beginnings at the Horseshoe. So we did quite a few photographs in the interior of the Horseshoe. It was in the daytime, so no one was there. It wasn't open as a bar. And I did some shots at the bar. I did some stuff in the dressing room. That particular day, it was overcast out. So I'm like, why don't we go outside and just do some stuff in the alleyway? So the alleyway behind the Horseshoe, we did these really cool shots where I was in the trunk of a car, my assistant's car, and I was sitting in the trunk, and I had Gordon and Jose walking down the alleyway, and my assistant was driving really slowly. So I have these shots of them walking down the alleyway, and it was kind of like our own little dolly we made. And then we did some shots against this gray beige wall, but it was overcast. So the light was really great. And one of the photos I got, which is probably my most known photograph I've ever made now, it's where Gord is kind of pulling his toque down. He's wearing the TTH toque. Looks like the NHL logo. Anyway, I shot a couple rolls there. That particular shot, Gord was just kind of fixing his hat. I was just doing a test photo. And it might have been the first or the second frame that I made. Anyway, I got the photos back. That was film. There was no digital in those days. I got the film back. And honestly, I looked at the film and I thought, there's nothing really here that jumps out at me. And I showed it to the person who was assisting me that day, Rich Sibbald, who's a really good friend of mine. And he's quite an accomplished photographer as well. Anyway, he always called me Beland. Beland, that's your shot. And he was pointing at that one in Gord with the toque. And I was looking at him like, yeah, I guess it's kind of an interesting shot. Honestly, it never jumped out at me because I was always very technical, and it was a bit blurry. It wasn't cropped perfectly. Anyway, the Hip's management called me, Jake Gold and Shelley Sturtz, and they said, "Can you come down and show us the photos. After the magazine chooses their photos, we want to know if we can use some of the photos for publicity. And so I went over to the Hips management on Queen Street there, and fortunately I brought a bunch of other photos with me of the Hip that I'd made over the years, and I brought a bit of a greatest hits of other photos. I brought those particular photos, and Shelly and Jake were looking at the photos. They're like, wow, what a great shot. And it was that shot of Gord with the toque. So it's kind of funny. All these people were picking out this photo that I didn't think much of at the time. And I said, do you mind if I show you some other photos while I'm here that I've made of the Tragically Hip over the years? And I have some other photos that I shot. And honestly, it was the greatest hits of whoever I thought was good at the time that I photographed. And so a couple days later, whatever, I think it was Shelly that called me, who would have been Jake's, I don't know if she was his assistant, but she worked with Jake. And she said, Richard, we want to know if we can license that photo for a limited time. And I said, for sure. And so they end up using it for publicity, and it kind of opened up this relationship. And she said at the time as well, we haven't hired a tour photographer for the Phantom Power Tour. Would you be interested in shooting some shows on the tour? And, on the phone, I'm like, I was so excited. Heck yeah. But I was trying to be cool and collected.
Let me think about it.
Yeah. And I'm like, well, for sure I'm in or whatever. But inside I was like, yes, this is great. So they opened the doors, and it was beautiful. And that started the relationship right up until today. I have an ongoing relationship. They have a book and a documentary coming out in October, and between the two, I have 92 photos that'll be in that book and documentary. That particular tour, I photographed whatever, I don't even remember, but a lot of shows. And they gave me absolute amazing access. But the real access started one night in Vancouver. We were backstage. I was just standing with the band. I never ever was the guy like, oh, can I talk to you guys or whatever? I would want to document what was going on. So I was off to the side, kind of minding my business. And Rob Baker came over to me and he said, why don't you come out on stage with us tonight and get some shots of the crowd? I'm like, what? And I'm like, oh my God, I don't have the right lens here. But it was too late. Like, it was during the encore, the crowd's going nuts waiting for the band. And I just was not prepared, and this is before digital. So I'm like, okay, all right. And I'm like, well, I don't even know what to do. Like, they didn't tell me anything. So the band walks up the stairs, and I could still remember the stairs. It's those metal stairs. And I'm looking down the stairs going, oh man. And so the band walks out on stage. Gord Downey's the last to walk out on the stage. The crowd, the lights are on, the crowd's going crazy. And I'm the sixth guy walking onto the stage. I don't know where to stand. They didn't tell me anything. And so I'm on this stage, and I've never been on a big stage at that point where there's 18,000 people going crazy. And so I'm like, shit, I don't know what to do. So anyway, I'm taking pictures, and in my head, I'm just like, nail the focus and nail the exposure, because there's no little picture to look on the back of the camera. I didn't have a wide enough angle to get the entire thing. But if you look at the photos now, I tried doing a rough panoramic. This is before pano existed. So I shot, and I'm just shooting. And I didn't, like I said, I didn't know where to stand. And I was very introverted and timid. And so I did my best. And, after that, the story goes on and on and on. But at one point, Johnny said to me, Johnny Fay, the drummer, he's like, Richard, if you want to stand in my drum riser at shows, just do that. But make sure I know it's you, because might hit you with the drumstick or push you off if I don't know it's you. And after that, they just opened it up, and I would stand side stage. And there's another shot of mine that's quite well known. It's where Gord Downey's, it's at Woodstock 99. Gord's laying on the tracks, and I got that standing on the stage as well. And man, I photographed the Tragically Hip in concert over 100 times, and it just carried on, and it was great. And God, I could tell you another 100 stories. Oh, and I photographed the album artwork for In Violet Light. You mentioned that, and that was another thing. I remember I was back in the VIP room afterwards. They would have these post-show parties or whatever, not parties, but they would invite some fans back, and I was just sitting down, and Rob Baker came and sat beside me. Rob was kind of the creative director for artwork, I think, for the band. And he's like, would you be interested in doing the photography for the next album? I'm like, what? He says, yeah. And I'm like, yes. And I was really shocked because I had never expected that was going to happen. It was never even something that was in my mind. So we did the In Violet Light artwork, which is a whole other story I can tell you. And then the next album was In Between Evolution. And, they don't use the same photographer album for album, but I ended up doing the publicity photos for that one. And that was amazing because we did that at the Bathhouse, which is their kind of headquarters, their jam room. And the Hip were never really comfortable, at least not for me, standing to do a portrait. So I said, why don't you guys just jam and I'll just photograph it while you're jamming. And I set some lights up in the corner, and they played for at least an hour, and they just jammed. And so I had this mini private concert, and I just photographed that. And those are quite known shots of mine as well. You see them in the room playing in this very tight little living room with books in the background.
Yeah.
And then I did Gord's solo record, and I got nominated for a Juno Award for that one. And
that was Battle of the Nudes or Coke Machine Glow?
That was Battle of the Nudes.
Battle of the Nudes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious. So you filmed their last tour?
Yeah, I shot maybe 7 or 8 shows. I was at 9 shows on the last tour. I never photographed the Kingston show for a number of reasons, but primarily because I just wanted to watch the very final show and not be distracted by the camera. But yeah, I shot 7 or 8 shows on the final tour.
What did that mean to you on a personal level to photograph that particular tour?
Every single night I was shooting through tears. God, sometimes I get choked up even talking about it, but on a personal level, it was bittersweet, heartbreaking. I knew the story that everyone knew, and I knew it was the final tour. I knew there was a final show coming. I was in Vancouver, so that would have been the second and third show, because I think they played 1 and 2 in Victoria. And, they were still finding their way, I think, for the tour on Vancouver. And the band played really close on the stage, and you could feel this close camaraderie with the guys. I mean, you always felt that with the band, with the Tragically Hip, but those particular shows, you really felt it. It meant the world to me to be there. And I don't know, it was just, part of me was kind of sad that knowing that it was the end. And of course, knowing Gord Downie had terminal cancer, right? I mean, it's not like I was friends or anything with the guys, but I had this amazing working relationship with them. But I felt like I knew them. I spent lots of time talking to Gord Downie. I spent time with Gord Downie. I spent a full day with Gord Downie out in the island in Toronto. So just knowing that was the end was tough. And, when Jerry Garcia died, I couldn't listen to the Grateful Dead for 10 years. And I had no personal relationship with the Grateful Dead, but I had a relationship with the Grateful Dead's music because I loved it so much. With the Tragically Hip, I had a personal working relationship. So it was even heavier. To this day, I've never watched those final Hip movies. I can't yet. I don't even barely listen to the Tragically Hip, and it's not because I don't like the music. I just can't go there still. And I know that sounds dramatic, but I'm still.
I kind of get that. I personally even have trouble with it, and I didn't have a working relationship with them, but I was just so entrenched in their music, and specifically Gord Downie. He was just a hero to me. And yeah, when he passed away, I probably didn't listen to the Hip for a couple years after that. After he passed away.
It's hard, So maybe it'll be this summer.
There you go.
Yeah.
I was curious because you said you just watched the Kingston show. Do you have trouble enjoying concerts? Like just sitting there and watching a concert, not photographing it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I'll see things I'm like, oh, that's great light, or oh, I should be standing over there. Or,
Yeah.
yeah. My brain is constantly looking through a viewfinder.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah. But that particular show, I was just into it. Yeah. And I was okay with it. You know, today I have some regrets for not photographing it, but you know, I can't be hung up on those regrets because I didn't.
You have a relationship, or you've had a relationship, professional one, with Nickelback. I'm curious because Nickelback, of course, they get a lot of hate from, I don't know, various people. But you've done some pretty big stuff with them, correct?
Huge. Yeah. Yep. Big stuff. I'm going to England next week, actually, for Nickelback.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Nice. So what's the experience with Nickelback been like? Because they are arguably one of the biggest Canadian bands ever.
They're probably the biggest selling Canadian band in terms of album sales, or certainly one of the top 3. Okay. So what's it been like? Well, it's been great. Anybody that doesn't like the music, okay, you don't like the music. I mean, I don't listen to Celine Dion, so I understand not liking the music. But I can tell you on a personal level, the 4 guys in Nickelback are 4 of the nicest, kindest, most generous, collaborative people I've ever worked with. And all of those words I just used as descriptive words come really naturally for me because it's true. They're just great guys. I feel like I'm hanging out with guys from Brights Grove that I grew up with, except they happen to be, you know, multi-million selling artists, and they are artists who have their art appreciated on a grand scale. But they're just really great guys. And I've never, even my relationship with the Tragically Hip was different than my relationship with Nickelback. Nickelback goes back to year 2001, I think. So I've been working with them for 23 years. Again, it was a Chart magazine shoot. Chart magazine said, oh, we got the shoot coming up with Nickelback. It's out in Vancouver. Do you want to go? Can you go do the shoot? I said, absolutely. Put me on a plane. Tell me where to land. I'm in. So I went out to Vancouver, and it was great. I walked into the studio that day. My assistant, I was with my friend Grant, who also went to Fanshawe with me out in Vancouver. And we walked into the studio. They were in the recording studio. Trying to remember what album that was. I forget the album. Sorry.
Silver Side Up. Is that what it's called? It would have been 01. I think that's when How You Remind Me came out.
Yeah, it might have been the album after Silver Side Up. Anyway, we walked into the recording studio. Chad was there, and he's like, hey, you know, and we started talking right away. And he's like, what do you drink? And I'm like, I don't normally drink when I'm working, so I'm good. Thanks, man. But thank you. And he's like, he kept pushing me. And now I know Chad, I know exactly what he's like. And he's like, what do you drink? And I'm like, and he had me on the spot, and I'm like, Heineken. And I don't even really drink Heineken. I just couldn't think of a beer off the top of my head. And within 20 minutes, there was a full case of Heineken at the studio. And so, you know, out of politeness, I drank a beer or two, but he got a 24 pack of Heineken sent to the studio. Anyway, we spent the day working with the band, and I was photographing Chad in the control room, you know, doing some playback and listening to whatever they're recording. So we kind of hit it off in a sense there that time with the whole band, and the photos ended up on the cover. The next album would have been All the Right Reasons. So I got the call again from Chart. They're like, you know, I guess you put on an impression because the band wants to know if you could be the photographer for the next magazine cover. I said, for sure, let's go. So we went out to Vancouver. We went to Abbotsford this time, to where Chad lives. And we went to his house. And Grant and I spent the day there, and we had an amazing photo shoot. It was so good. And so the photos end up being put on the cover of the magazine. And then we also did shots for All the Right Reasons that day, which was remarkable. at the time we were in the control room there, and Chad played back the entire album to us. So I got to hear All the Right Reasons before anyone in the world heard it. And he talked through the songs and told us about them. And I can distinctly remember Animals, which is this upbeat, really great lyrical song. And I just remember going, oh, wow, this is a good song and people are going to dig this. And so my shots ended up being put in the album. The album sold over 20 million copies. So it was an amazing accomplishment for me. Even to this day, I'm very proud of it, because in the grand scheme of the world, there's not a lot of albums that have sold over 20 million copies. So anyway, we built this relationship and it really galvanized itself on All the Right Reasons. And that particular day, we had one more shot left that we were going to do. And I didn't really know what I was going to do. And Chad has this really cool swimming pool in his backyard. And I said to my assistant, I'm like, what do you think if I just ask them to jump in the pool with their clothes on and we'll get some shots? And I didn't know if it was a good idea. And Grant's like, yeah, man, just ask him. And I'm like, so I went to the band. I'm like, okay, I got this idea for the very last shot. Why don't you guys get in the pool? We'll set some lights up and we'll photograph. And they're like, yeah, man, that's a great idea. Thank God I asked them that, because I honestly thought that I might not ask them. And anyway, they jumped in the pool. It was the last shot because now their clothes are wet and I got them, head to toe in the water or whatever. And it ended up being used in the album, the pool shot. That particular tour, they did this publicity thing where they're going to go across Canada in one day. So I got the call to be the photographer on that. So they flew me out to Halifax. We started in the morning in Halifax on a private airplane. There were some journalists on the plane. Obviously the band was on the plane, myself and an assistant, and I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 or 40 fans. So we had a plane all to ourselves. We flew from Halifax that morning. They played a little acoustic show in the Halifax airport, jumped on the plane. We flew to Toronto. We got a police escort, which was kind of cool because it was like the most rock and roll, un-rock and roll thing I've ever done. We had a police escort drive us into Toronto. We went to Much Music. They played a gig at Much Music. And mind you, I was photographing everything. We went over to HMV, which was kind of a stone's throw from Much Music back then. They did this big autograph signing there. We jumped back in the buses. We had another police escort out to the airport. We jumped back on the airplane. We flew to Calgary or Edmonton, one of the two, Calgary, I think. Then we pulled up on the airplane and there's an airplane hangar, like a massive hangar. And there's 1,000 fans in the hangar, a stage already set up. We jumped off the plane. I photographed everything, them coming down the ramp off the plane. They played another gig there for this very intimate crowd. And I photographed all that. We jumped back on the plane. We flew to Vancouver. And keep in mind, this is all in one day. So I went coast to coast with Nickelback in a day. We landed in Vancouver. We went to another HMV. They did this huge autograph signing. There was people lined up all the way down the street. Must have been 150 people. I photographed all of this. Every single guest got a photo and an autograph with Nickelback. And so that was one of my big ones on All the Right Reasons. I flew coast to coast in a day with Nickelback. I ended up doing some shows on the tour for them. And I want to say this and let you know how grateful I am, because they've been calling me ever since then. And I photographed, I don't even know, like all kinds of shows around North America. Like I said, I'm on my way to Manchester and London to photograph them next week. I've done album photography for them, shot publicity campaigns for them. I was just in Vancouver in January with them, maybe even February. They did a video shoot. So I did the stills on the video. We photographed publicity for the European tour. That particular day, which was just a couple months ago. I don't know. It goes on.
That's wild.
It's been amazing.
Crazy.
Yeah. So I've had a really great relationship with Nickelback, and anyone that harasses them or whatever, I'm a bit defensive. But if you don't like the music, that's fine. You don't like the music, but you can't say anything bad about those guys. There's nothing bad to say about the 4 members of Nickelback. They are just really great guys.
We do need to get into, so I know we're almost done here, but I know you've said everything's just been a trajectory, but I know an area that you went into that you kind of weren't expecting was to start up the program or do the coordinator position and professor position at the college. So do you want to talk a bit about that, how that came about?
Sure. So, my memory, I don't remember what year, but let's say it was 2012. I was living in Toronto, and one night I was photographing in Niagara Falls. I've been the house photographer for Falls View Casino for 20 something years. Anyway, I was in Niagara Falls, and that night I was photographing Al Pacino, which was really cool. And I bumped into two of my buddies there, Greg Lee and Alistair Mackay. Alistair Mackay is the culinary coordinator at Lambton College. I've known these guys since high school, and we just, saw each other, had a quick chat or whatever. A week later, I was in Toronto. I was actually in a park. I was on my phone, and my phone rang through, call waiting, and I looked at it, and it said Lambton College. And I kind of had forgotten about seeing Alistair. I'm like, geez, why are they calling me? I hope they don't want me to teach, which is kind of funny now looking ahead. And anyway, I let it go to voicemail because I was talking to a band manager about a photo shoot. I listened to the voicemail later on, and it was Alistair calling me saying, hey, Lambton's thinking about building a photography program. They're looking for an SME, a subject matter expert. Would you be interested in interviewing for the position? And I thought, I don't know, this is after the voicemail. And I thought to myself, I've done a lot of interesting things in my career, but something like this is so unique. Like every college in Ontario has a photography program. This opportunity will never, ever come up again. So with that in mind, I called back and I said, absolutely, set the meeting up. I'll drive to Sarnia. I built the structure for the program. I built the curriculum, what was going to be taught, what would be over the 4 terms, what classes were going to be where. And near the end of the building process, I met with Rob again, and he said, we haven't hired a coordinator or a lead instructor. Would you be interested? And immediately in my brain, I was thinking, no. This is not why I got into this. I had no desire to teach. And, I can tell you this honestly now, I was scared to be in front of people. I'd been asked to do workshops in the past, and I'd always said no because I had this great fear of speaking in front of people. And at the time, I had 2 young children. They're teenagers now, young teens. But at the time, I had young children, and I thought, you know what? I've been on this rock and roll roller coaster, which has always served me well. There's no reason to not get off the roller coaster, except maybe I could be home more if I built this teaching position. It really was about trying to build security for my kids and to be home more, to be a better parent. Anyway, I took the job, and day one was brutal. I was so scared. And honestly, this is a true story. I walked into the room on that very first day of teaching, and my knees were shaking so bad I couldn't stand. I literally couldn't stand. So on day one, I lied to the class. I said, I'm going to sit down with you guys because I want to be on the same level as you. But the truth is I couldn't stand because my legs were shaking so much. I was so terrified to talk in front of people. And so I sat down and taught that day. And now I'm very grateful to Lambton College because it uncovered another passion that I didn't know I have. And I don't know if you would call it teaching, but it's more about sharing information and going and telling stories and just trying to better other people's lives, I guess. If you're interested in photography, I want to help if I can. And so I ended up getting the coordinator job, and I guess you could say I'm the lead professor. I teach the most classes, but we have a great team of instructors that are all working photographers, and it's made me a better photographer. I'm a way better photographer in the 10 years I've been teaching than the 20 years prior being a photographer. And I'm still a photographer. As you know, last year I photographed 72 shows. I photographed 87 houses. I did a handful of big photo shoots where like portrait sessions, and there's all kinds of other things I did. I've probably done 10 workshops for photo clubs. This whole thing has just opened up into this other area that if I would have said no because of my introversion, I would have missed out on a whole bunch of things. And I might not have realized that I had a passion for teaching, which I do. And I'm really happy. If a grand piano like on Bugs Bunny falls from the sky tomorrow and takes me out, you have it on record that I died happy.
I hope a piano doesn't fall on you tomorrow.
No.
I'll put that on the record. Yeah, hopefully not.
I hope it doesn't, but should my fate meet me tomorrow, I'm gone, happy person.
Nice.
Yeah, it's been great.
It's good to say yes to things and scare yourself a little bit. Go outside of your comfort zone. Corey and I talk a lot about that on this show, that a lot of the good things that we've done have been well outside of what we were comfortable doing, but it's good to push yourself like that. And like you said, it's opened up a lot of new experiences for you.
I think you're right about that. And probably anybody that's done well realizes that you have to get outside your comfort zone, or you miss out on opportunities. And I was more blockheaded in the early days, I think, just thinking I can remain in this little box and carry on. But I realize now that, jumping outside of your comfort zone. So you and Corey talking about that, I agree with you guys, but I might not have agreed 25 years ago.
Yeah. Same. Yeah. That's something
probably.
That's come to me probably in the last decade, actually, is saying yes to things that are scary or that are a risk to take. Right. Last question for you. If people were to tune in and watch this episode with you, what would they take from it?
Your most ambitious goals are within reach if you want to work hard for them. I don't want to say your dreams can come true, because it's not that simple. But if you want to frame it as your most ambitious goals are within reach, if you want to work hard, if you want to be ambitious, if you want to be motivated, if you want to learn your craft, for lack of a better word, get out there and do it, because you can do it. But anyone that thinks it's going to happen overnight, anyone that thinks it's going to happen in 3 years, I think is, unless you're born with some incredible talent. I know guitar players that can play like Jimi Hendrix because they were born with this natural talent. That's pretty rare. Be engaged. I don't want to say play the game, but you got to be engaged in what you want to do. And there's a great world out there, and there's a great career out there for anybody to do their own thing. Yeah, if you want to work hard for it. So if I had to put it in a sentence, your most ambitious goals are there if you want to work for them.
Did you have anything that you wanted to plug?
Go to my Instagram, Richard.Beland, Beland. Go to my website, which is it needs some work right now, but it's richardbeland.com. I have an exhibition that's coming up it's going to be in May 2025. I know that sounds like a long ways away, but it isn't when you're building an exhibition. It's a year now, and that'll be at List Gallery in Toronto. And it'll be a big deal. My last one was a big deal there. And then if you're interested in being a photographer, we have an amazing program at Lambton College, photography. If you want any information about it, you're welcome to DM me or call me at the office or email me, richard.beland@lambtoncollege.ca. We have a really, really great program. And I think what makes our program so great and unique is that all the people that teach in our program are working photographers. I personally think we have a really great program, and that's at Lambton College in Sarnia. And it's a 2-year program, and we'd love to see you there. So
I think you can see some examples on lensonlambton.ca of some of the things that students do too, right?
Yeah, and that's our Instagram too, is Lens on Lambton. Lambton's LAMB, B like boy, TON, Lambton.
Thanks so much for doing this, Richard. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, it's so fun. Thank you. This is an opportunity to bring back some great memories. So thank you guys.